are we? And I'll go back to the start. So about 15 years ago now, Greenpeace launched a campaign that focused on the toxic effects of dyes. And so it was the first time that any organization, any any environmental group, if you like, focused its attention on one particular industry, the textiles industry, and one segment of the industry. And they were quite effective at encouraging industry to change, as we'll see in the next few slides. But they released a number of reports, such as the dirty laundry one, and started to explain to the public what actually happens when you dye a product. So all the things I've just been explained would were coming out in this report. What was interesting with this whole episode is the fashion industry initially sort of rejected it, but very quickly started to acknowledge that they needed to change their game. So rather than sort of continually fight it and say no, 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 they started adopting or working with Greenpeace. So sort of it was a changing dynamic of one of confrontation between um, um, activists, sustainable activists and industry, one of cooperation. And we're seeing more and more of that emerge as time goes by. And it's certainly been an instructive lesson for a lot of industries that sometimes you need to change, acknowledge that change is upon us, and then sort of work towards that change. Now, I just wanted to show you this dirty laundry publication by Greenpeace and why it got the attention of the fashion industry is because you'll notice here it put the labels front and center. And you'll know from marketing that brands spend a lot of time and energy creating a particular perception in the market about a company. And then here comes Greenpeace, global player that sort of repositions the brand in not a favorable light. So you can see that they couldn't ignore it that easily. Have a look at that if you're interested in this. Whoa. But I'll show you this detox campaign, which I thought also added to the effectiveness of what they did. It was a campaign against Zara, and why I liked it is because they used fashion to challenge fashion. Normally, when we think about what a protest is, it's usually people blocking a train or blocking a road or being confronted by police. This was done in a much more clever and I think effective way. As I said, very clever campaign. What you would have seen that Detox logo. So what Greenpeace did is not just protest, but also suggest a solution for it, which I'm trying to find here somewhere. Oh, yeah. Detox. So they set up this detoxification program where you were graded. Your brand was given a score, and Greenpeace would put that score out there. So in effect, if you were a polluter or you didn't provide much information about what you were doing with your dyes, then Greenpeace would give you a low score. And obviously, if you were um, showing some sort of improvements or acknowledgement of the waste and the pollution, then you'd be given a better score. Again, for brands, this is problematic because Greenpeace were now controlling the message of these brands, and brands don't like that. They want to control their own message, not leave it up to other ones. So it forced these brands to work with Greenpeace. So as I said, very, very effective one. I'll just give you a couple of examples. You can have a look at this. So Avant-Garde, these are the sort of held up as the benchmarks, the ones that are doing the most. Inditex, Benetton, and H&M. Very different a few years ago. Evolution, these are brands that are sort of moving towards acknowledging that they need to improve their dyes, the dyeing process, I should say. And Faux Pas, the ones that talk big but don't actually do much when you dig down into it deeper. I think Nike's improved on that since, as I said, this is 2016. Okay, but have a look at that in a bit more detail if you like. They also went on to produce other reports detailing in it, so it was a long campaign picked up by other brands as well. So Greenpeace also focused on North Face and did a slightly different campaign there, and I'll just show you that one to give you an idea. Might be slightly pixelated.
Due to PFCs used in the manufacturing of some of your North Face gear, dangerous chemicals are getting closer to nature than you are. That's why us Greenpeace volunteers went into a North Face store to try and find some PFC-free water repellent gear. But are these PFCs really so bad? Take a look. During manufacture, PFCs are released into the environment, getting into rivers, forests, and even the air we breathe. They take a really long time to break down and can have pretty serious health effects. That's not good news for animals. Globetrotting PFCs have even been found in the livers of polar bears. PFCs can be found in the North Face tents, sleeping bags, jackets, backpacks, pants, and boots. So let's see how our volunteers are going.
I got an email the other day. I was talking about weatherproofing PFCs. I'd love to get a good jacket, but I don't know. Do you know much about that? It doesn't sound like good stuff.
Is it mainly the jackets that it's in, or do you have waterproof jackets or anything that doesn't contain that? Or
Is any of this stuff over here PFC free? I feel like there's no waterproof gear in here that I can really feel comfortable in.
All right, mate. Well, I'll take a look. I might try something on in a bit.
We could not find any waterproof clothing which was PFC free. So instead, our volunteers exited the store wearing the only thing they felt comfortable in.
until North Face take PFCs out of their outdoor gear,
we'd rather be wearing cardboard boxes.
This is important to all people who spend time in the outdoors because we want to have access to gear that's not going to pollute the environment. We want to have access to gear that's going to keep the places we love the way they are. We want North Face to stop using PFCs in their waterproof material.
So make sure.
So as you can see there, just another example of the growing awareness on some of these chemicals and how they're applied to various garments. Okay, let's have a look at some of the trends then. As a consequence of the Greenpeace campaign all those years ago, we're starting to see certain companies move in different directions. And as I've said previously, we don't know what the future holds. We're in a time of uncertainty. And so we look at various companies and ask ourselves, is this the trend? Is this the way it's going to go? and hopefully, we catch the wave and ride it to success. So I'll start by showing you a couple of Italian brands. Genealogia first, which, where are we? Oops, no, here it is. Okay, so in the 1980s, as the Chinese garment industry ramped up production and started to enter into the European market, the traditional apparel industry in Italy struggled to compete with China because of the efficiencies and the low cost of their products. And so they sort of lingered, a lot of them collapsed, some sort of kept on going. But in the last couple of years, what we've started to see is a slightly different take by the Italian industry and a re-emergence to some extent by incorporating sustainability into their brand. So in this case, with this company, what they're selling is the technology that allows you to dye the denim without using much water. And the idea is normally, this happens at the back end of the supply chain. The customer doesn't know about it, but now they're sort of educating the customer to the process of dyeing of the jean and saying, buy it because it has this particular logo on it. So you start to see the selling point of a garment not being its style and design, but the way in which it was processed and the minimal impact on the environment. Another Italian brand which also does that is Pure Denim, or Ital Denim. And as you can see, our denim comes from an entire redesign of the production system. It is inspired by circular economy principles that combine technology excuse me, innovative materials in order to minimize waste. So obviously the image suggests style and aesthetic, but what's behind it is a substance or a value system based on sustainability principles or product life cycle principles. So we sort of watch these brands to see how they evolve. Coming from Italy, being a fashion center, we should not ignore it. But if you have a look at this, you'll see how they've sort of introduced people into this concept. I don't know if it's on this point where they've got it. First denim producer in the world to sign the Greenpeace's Detox Protocol that we mentioned before. So they're right in there with it. Okay. So that's at one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum is measuring how green your supply chain is. And Patagonia has played a significant role in this by setting up the HIGS Index, which is a coalition of players that subscribe to a model, a scorecard system, if you like. Where's my HIGS? Okay, so what it is as a company, you sign up to it, you pay dollars to it, and then you fill out a report card, if you like, of what you're doing at each stage in the supply chain. What dyes are you using? What happens to the excess water from those dyes? Are you using particular labels? And the HIG index will give you a score to tell you how green you are. And then you can obviously use that to promote your brand based on that. So there's a bit of a competition in the world at the moment to come up with a sustainable index. There's no one way of claiming that you're green. But it takes into account some of these: greenhouse gas emissions, energy use, water pollution, deforestation, etc. Animal welfare. Also has a social index. Do you use child labor? How do you ensure you don't use child labor, etc. Bribery and corruption. So all of these are just mirrors of our model of the natural world and Kay Raworth's sustainable development model. As I said, it's spearheaded by Patagonia, and sorry, I was just looking for the brands. Where are we? Brands and retailers, and it's gaining a fair bit of traction. And you'll notice here some of the brands. I think they're here somewhere. Where are we? some you've noticed. So once the big brands start signing up to this, it tends to become fait accompli that other brands should follow suit. I think even Kmart's here somewhere. So Zara, there's Zara. Oh yeah, there we are. So that's been fairly recent for Kmart Australia to sign up to this. Kathmandu, etc. So I'd probably say that this this index is going to grow in the foreseeable future. Uh, the zero map to fuck off. The roadmap to zero discharge is another one. This was set up by some of the big players who use a lot of chemicals, initially as a way of looking like they were doing something impressive when they weren't really. But it's since sort of started to evolve into um, a belief that you should use technology uh, and various chemicals to dye garments, but to do it in a more environmentally sustainable way. So these are different processes, different companies, all starting to agree on what the standards should be. Because as you can imagine, with this whole field, there's a whole for fuck's sake. Where is it? The roadmap to zero discharge was initially started as a bit of a cynical exercise. It was a reaction to the detox campaign, but it was chemical companies that kind of wanted to look good without really doing much initially. But it has since evolved into something which is sort of significant and substantial, in that you've got different chemical companies sort of working together to create standards of what an agreeable pollution level is, or uh, what emission levels should be recorded for different chemicals. One of the problems that you've got arguing against chemicals is it's difficult to sort of create a benchmark, because every chemical is slightly different, has a slightly different impact on the environment. So it's, you know, you can't say a chemical is bad, full stop, because we rely on them every day of our lives. So this roadmap to change also created this sort of another standard, if you like, that you can use. So you can have a look at that one as well. Probably won't go into it at this stage. There we go. Some of the brands, so they're also signed up to this. So this is where you have to watch out a bit, because, you know, when major brands start signing up to everything, you start to wonder, well, is that just a cynical marketing exercise, or is there some substance behind it? And that's where you as an individual have to research, or you as a brand have to research the sort of the efficacy of these different models. Probably the last one I'll show you then is dye code. There's a couple of processes similar to genealogia that don't use water. They use CO2 instead to dye the garments. So fantastic for not using for water reduction. However, they're quite expensive at the moment. So it's yet to be seen as to whether the costs come down as they scale up production, or it's just simply a prohibitive process. What is interesting is that when you get brands like Nike buying into Daiku and actually buying the process and owning this waterless dyeing treatment, you ask yourself, well, maybe this is sort of the Nike extending their supply chain and trying to control as much of the process, because they feel that it is the future. We don't know yet, but it's certainly a good sign, or a sign, that these processes may indeed be the future. So if we go back and have a look at dyeing solutions and look at natural dyes, This is the traditional way where you might squash a beetroot or something else and apply it to a fabric. There's a lot of contestation as to whether this is a viable option. It sounds viable on the surface of it. It's like, what's more harmless than growing a vegetable, squashing it, applying the dye, and if there's any runoff, it goes back into the veggie garden. Well, the problem is concentration levels. If you concentrate a vegetable dye in a high quantity and put it in the veggie garden or into the soil, it actually will destroy a lot of the microorganisms in that soil. So it's not as sweet as it may sound. The other problem you've got with natural coloured crops is it's land that's required to grow food. So you're using space, land system change once again, to grow a crop which will be used to dye clothes and not a crop to feed people. And that could be another contentious issue. Nevertheless, Patagonia have got a range somewhere here. Why is this not working? There we go. Where are you, Patagonia? There it is. The Clean Color Collection, and there they've got some plant-based material that they've applied to particular garments, and you can shop by Clean Color. So it's not that it's a bad one. It is probably limited in its effectiveness or its scope, but it's certainly in the mix as to whether plant-based is the way to go. So to finish off, I thought I'd finish with this image here where we've got a China of the 1960s here, and this was the fashion of the time because the government at that stage issued the clothes that you wore. They were all produced in the same factory, retailed in the same stores, and you didn't have much choice. Blue was the color. Today in Shanghai, it's obviously a very, very different China. Very colorful, and I think you'd agree, much more interesting than the bland color of the 1960s. So color's here to stay. It's integral into the fashion. It's integral to the fashion industry. The question then becomes how we create and apply these colors. Okay, thank you. Have a go at the tutorial, the quiz questions, and then hopefully I'll see you in the tutorial.